Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023 week 40, October 2nd to October 8th. Since I am currently recording this the morning of the release date, I probably am not going to say too much because I'm a little bit behind on my schedule, so I apologize for that. So I am going to be working on the rear brakes, so I need to shim the rear brakes, and so that's what I'm getting out right now, is all the rear brake shim stuff. So the procedure to shim the rear brakes is you take the caliper off, you pull the pads out of the caliper, you bolt everything back up, and then what you do is you take a caliper and you measure from the outside of the rotor at the bottom left to the inside of the piston, and then you do the same thing for the top left of the rotor to the piston, the top right, and then the bottom right. And then what I do is I add the two distances together, divided by 2, and that's my midpoint. And then what I need to do is I need to make sure that the caliper and the rotor are within 5/1000ths of the midpoint from the left and to the right. Now the company only sends 16th thou shims, so it's not going to be perfect, and the company says as close to 5 thou as you can get it. I get it pretty darn close. I'm pretty happy with it. But yeah, so that's the procedure for shimming the brakes, and before I do any of that stuff, I need to take all the old wheels off. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to get ready to shim the brakes. And one of the first things that I needed to do is I needed to switch the rotors side to side because I had the left on the right and the right on the left. When I was initially doing this, I mean, it didn't really matter. I was just mocking it up, but now that I'm kind of getting this set, I want the correct side rotor on the correct side. With that all tightened up, I'm just going to throw a few lug nuts on the rotor just to make sure that it's tight to the axle. That way I can get an accurate measurement. So unfortunately, I try here, the calipers that I have just are not long enough to get into the caliper and the rotor. So this is a big showstopper because it means I can't do any of the measuring. Well, even though I can't measure and shim the brakes, I can see what this rim and tire looks like on the car because goddamn, I want to see how good that thing looks. And yeah, it looks good. I'm just going to get the other side ready to measure for when I do order the longer calipers. I start putting the caliper back on, and then I realize I never put the rotor on, so take that back off, put the rotor on, and then we'll put the calipers on. Since the rears are at a standstill until I get some tools that I can measure it with, what I can do is I can jack the car up, pull the front tires off, put the new front tires on. So yeah, let's just do that. Now that I'm putting the new tires on, which will actually accept the front calipers, I can put the front brakes on. That's exciting. Yeah, that looks real good. So I had an idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the pads back in, and I'm going to take some feeler gauges and see if I can measure the gap between the rotor and the pads with feeler gauges. This doesn't end up working out all that well because the feeler gauges I have don't go as thick as I need to get between the pad and the rotor. So I didn't want to spend a whole bunch of time dicking around trying to get the right combination of feeler gauges to get the thickness. So yeah, this just doesn't work. So since that idea didn't work, pull it back off, pull the pads out, put the caliper back on, and I will just have to get something that I can get in there and measure with. Fortunately, I have a friend and he has these long jaw calipers, and I can easily get in there and measure the distance between the rotor and the pistons now. So we can go ahead with the shimming procedure. I already explained it. Measure in 4 spots on the caliper, do a bit of math, and then shim out as needed. Ends up I needed 2/16 thou shims on the bottom of this between the caliper bracket and the caliper, and then everything lined up perfectly. first side shimmed out happily, I can pull the caliper off, throw the pads in, and get this back on the car and mounted. And then go over to the driver's side and do the exact same thing. The driver's side, I didn't even need any shims. It was just good to go straight out of the gate. now that I've got all of the tires back, or all of the brakes back on, I can throw the tires on the car. And as I'm throwing this tire on, I quickly realize I'm putting the wrong tire on. So these tires are directional, so they rotate in a very specific way. And at the very bottom of the tire, you can see rotation and it's pointing to the right, which would mean that it's going the wrong way. I want the rotation at the top pointing to the right so that it's going clockwise when you're going down the road. Right now it would be going counterclockwise as it was going down the road. Well, the tire would still rotate clockwise as it's going down the road, but the tire would be going the wrong way. Anyways, quickly pulled it back off, put the right tire on, and yeah, I am so happy with how those rims look. Alright, with the new tires and rims on, I can put the back tires on the wheel cribs and get this at ride height. So after getting this at ride height, I looked around and kind of realized that the car wasn't quite level in the back end, and the rear shocks aren't adjusted the same. So what I'm going to do is jack this back up, and I'm going to very quickly, well, I say very quickly, but it does take me a bunch of time, but I'm going to readjust the rear shocks so that it's the same on both sides. And I've got this jacked up by the axle, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, oh, why isn't this spinning? Well, dumbass, you got everything compressed. So everything's all tight and bound up right now, so it's not going to adjust easily. So as you can see, I take the nut off and I'm like, okay, this fucking bolt is super tight. What do I gotta do? Well, dumbass, you gotta let the suspension droop, and then everything will be loose and free. So I'm thinking about this, and then I finally realized, yeah, Ben, you're a dumbass. You need to put this back on the jack stands, let the suspension droop down, and then you'll be able to easily pull that out and do the adjustments that are needed. Right, the reason why I wanted to pull that nut out is the adjuster for the rebound in whatever settings was facing the bracket, so it would have been almost impossible to get in there to adjust. So that's why I wanted to pull that bolt out so I could spin that around. And now you can see the adjuster knob is facing the back, so you can actually adjust it. With that, I can tighten all the bolts, and then I will adjust the collar on the shock itself to just make it the same as the other side. everything's adjusted, I'm like, okay, let's just quickly check the suspension. So I'm pushing down on the hatch, and it is solid. Like, this thing is not moving at all. So I'm under the car, I'm kind of pushing up on it, and it is not freaking moving. Like, this car is solid. I was like, okay, well, maybe it just takes a little bit for the suspension to settle. Not a big deal. We'll survive. And then I see like this huge gap between the tires, and I'm just kind of like, oh, whatever, you know. Obviously, it is what it is. It'll settle. Not a big deal. So I'm sitting here thinking, contemplating, taking some pictures, whatever. Like, that gap isn't ideal, but, you know, it'll work. And then off camera, I realized, fuck, Ben, you dumbass. You've got the body sitting on the jack stands. So off camera, I took it off the jack stands, and now suspension's doing what it's supposed to. It's flexing, it's moving, and I'm kind of happy. Yeah, so what I'm doing here is I am measuring the angles of the driveline. I need the diff to be up like a max of 3 degrees. I need the transmission down a max of 3 degrees. And I'm just going to measure for the drive shaft length right now. So that's what I'm doing here. And I believe my measurement becomes 46.5, or is 46.5, doesn't become it. And so then I haven't talked to any drive shaft companies yet, but I will be able to go and talk to a drive shaft company and get a custom drive shaft made up for this, knowing that I'm 46.5 inches from the front of the transmission to the flange on the diff. All right, with that measured, the next thing that I'm going to work on is the Ebrake cables. Figure what the hell, I've got the brakes on, they're installed as needed, so let's get these park brake cables on. And at first, I didn't really remember how these go on, so I'm just figuring this out. I'm kind of looking at this like, shit, this cable is super long, like what the hell's going on? And then I eventually realized, oh, there's this little hole in the frame that you'll see me put the cable through in a second here. And so the cable comes in from the backside, through that hole, clips on, goes through the pulley, onto the Ebrake cable. So yeah, so here we go. I pull this little E-clip off, because I'm using a pick, I almost stabbed myself. But yeah, so it goes through the back of the firewall. This clip that goes in there, goes around the pulley, goes into the Ebrake bracket. Bob's your uncle. From here, it's just figuring out the routing for the rest of it. My car, obviously, you can see like fuel line and the brake line, that's all been removed off the car, so I don't have any of the original brackets, but I'm gonna have to figure something out. And what I'm doing here is, these are the park brake brackets that go on the backing plate for the rear brakes. What I need to do is, I remembered from when I was originally fitting these up, is the bolts are too long. So there's nothing in the instructions that mention these bolts possibly being too long. So when I initially did this, I bolted it all up, and the wheel wouldn't move because those bolts, where it goes through, it's directly behind the hat for the brake. So if you tighten it all the way up, it actually stops the rotor from moving. So I throw some additional washers under there, remembering that if I don't do that, I'm gonna screw the brakes up. But yeah, so put the brackets on, and then I can figure out all of the Ebrake routing from there. because these rims are so deep. The Ebrake cable has to kind of come onto the control arm and like around the rim. So I am gonna have to build a bracket for this and weld it to the lower control arm so that, you know, it floats up and down and has a little bit of movement, but it is also kept off the tire. But for right now, the zip ties are okay, and probably for like the shakedown cruise, I'm probably okay with just having them zip tied there as long as it's not actually hitting the tire. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, and of course the other side goes a bit quicker. Alright, now that the park brake cables are installed, we can go inside the car and actually adjust up the handle and put some tension on those cables. And I'll give you a couple of shots from inside the car and also down below as I pull on it. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to move over to the throttle cable. It's been hanging down long enough. I just want it done. So first thing I need to do is I need to properly tighten the cable onto the throttle body brackets. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure how long the cable in the engine bay needs to be. I'll mark it on the sheath. I'll pull it back off. I'll cut the sheathing up to that mark. And then there's a little metal inner sheathing. I'll need to cut that to length. And then from there, I can thread the piece onto the metal and plastic outer sheathing that goes into the firewall. Then I'll go back into the car, tighten it to the firewall. I will measure the length inside the car for where it needs to attach to the pedal. Then what I'll do is I end up pulling the accelerator pedal out of the car, so that way I can tighten the piece that attaches to the accelerator pedal outside the car, because I couldn't get a wrench or a socket on it inside the car. Then I can adjust the cable to where I need it to be, mark the cable, pull it out. I solder the end of the cable together so that it doesn't fray when I cut it. I then cut it, and then I put the whole thing all back together. So as I was putting the pedal back in, I looked up and I noticed this blue wire hanging out of my ignition switch. That's not good. So I'm going to have a quick little side project after I get this pedal on and fix that, because that's really bad to just have that power wire hanging there. It means I'm not powering a circuit, so the next time I try to do something, fire up the car or whatever, it means it's not going to work as I expect it to and need it to. Actually, now that I say that, I think the blue wire might be going to the starter. Might be. I don't remember. I think it's going to the starter. I think that's the start switch. It goes to the clutch switch, and then from the clutch switch it goes to the starter. So, you know, I'd try and start it from the inside and it just wouldn't crank or do anything. Alright, now that I got that fixed, back to the throttle cable. So now that I've reviewed the video, you know, I fully operate the throttle blade, and then I go in the car and I hit the pedal, and it doesn't look like it's quite fully going, and I'm pretty sure that's because the pedal is hitting the frame on, or the gas pedal is hitting the frame on the inside, so I'm gonna have to make an adjustment there. All right, next side project. I'm trying to figure out how to get these spark plug cable wires routed, and off camera I'm gonna go and I'm gonna design some wire holders so that I can kind of keep these organized. So not much going on here. I'm just checking to see how I want to run these. All right, next side project is I want to see where I'm going to mount the catch can. I need to mount this in here somewhere, so I'm just trying to figure out the best place. I'm going to have two -10 lines going to it. I also need to keep in mind I'm going to have AC lines running in here, so I'm just trying to figure out where to mount this. I don't end up finding a good place. I figure what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until I'm a little bit further along, until I have kind of some more sheet metal work done on the inside of the tube front end there, as well as once I have the intercooler actually mounted so I know exactly where that intake pipe is going. Yeah, so this was, you know, 20-30 minutes of thinking of where I'm going to put this and not actually figuring it out. So it is what it is. Now that I haven't figured anything there out, I do have a new turnbuckle for the main drive belt. So what ends up happening is I got a new longer one, or shorter one, because the longer one wasn't going to work initially. So I bought a slightly shorter one. So I put it on there, I adjusted all the way out, and it doesn't work. So I go back to the original one that I bought, and it works just fine. So I'm able to get this drive belt on. I get the Pro Charger bracket all remounted. Everything is good to go as far as the belts are concerned. So I could actually run this car and have the alternator charging the battery. If I get all of the water pump connections done, I could actually have the water pump running. So there's a lot of good stuff going on here. So with all of the belts on, I'm going to start working on some heater stuff because there's not a whole lot else to do in the engine bay at this exact moment in time. So I'm going to start by trying to get a couple of these heater hoses on. It's pretty tight back there, so I'm just trying to figure things out. I might have to move that box forward. I'm not entirely sure at this point. And since I wasn't entirely sure, I didn't get too far, and that is all the time that we have for today. So as always, if you've stuck around, I would like to thank you for viewing, and we will catch you in the next one.